So those are really the major phases. And the reason I bring that up is because as we go through this, you'll see how these are either separated in the way the project is delivered or they're combined as we go forward. So next slide, Kevin. Some terms that you're going to hear as I go through this is public owner and private sector. Well, public owner is essentially you. That's who owns the particular bridge. The private sector would be who you hire to deliver the project. And we'll talk about what particular elements you might hire them to do as part of this. We talked about project phases. Roles and responsibilities are going to get into who does what. Risk assumption and sharing is a key part when you start talking about going from a traditional delivery to more of a design build or public-private partnership approach. And we'll talk more about that. Traditional or innovative alternative, most public projects are traditional, and I'll go through that. But then we'll talk about innovative and alternative approaches. Control or shift to control is a real important issue for the BiState working group. And I'll hit on that a little bit more. That's really what you control versus you shift to control over to the private sector. Negotiated or firm bid. In many cases, projects are done through government for a firm bid. Some are negotiated, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And funding and financing is critical because there's a difference. Funding is really your grants that you're going to bring in. It's your toll revenues. It's the things that are actually going to pay the bills. Financing is simply moving that money up in time. Okay, so it's taking money. It's just like a mortgage on your home, okay, or issuing bonds for a governmental agency. So next slide, Kevin.
Lowell, can I interrupt? Kevin,
absolutely.
Kevin, is it possible to make that larger? At least on my screen, I see a small version of the presentation slide, and then I see the next slide to the right, and it's just more difficult to read.
Kevin, if you go up to the slideshow up at the upper left, it should go to it. Nope, not that one. The next, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Now we're going to get into the actual project delivery approaches. This is what's called traditional. And I have two sides to this: the public owner, which is the governmental entity that owns the project, and the private sector that you'll be hiring to do elements of this. Under traditional, you do 100% of what's called the design and permits. And think about this like building a house. Okay, you would pick everything. You would pick where the walls are going to go. You would pick what's going to be in your fixtures. You would have everything identified, your paint color, everything, 100%. And then you would put that out for a bid in what we call request for bids. The contractor would use your provided design and permits, and he would provide you a firm bid, an actual price. These are typically picked on low bid. Okay, so whoever has the lowest price typically wins. A key issue here is if there's a change in work, you know, you want to change the paint color as an example or whatever, the contractor is going to say, hey, you got to pay me for that. Okay, I'm not going to absorb that. Any changes that occur, and in bridge projects, a key area on this is when you're drilling shafts. If you have a design that assumes a certain depth, say 80 feet, and all of a sudden it turns out being 90 feet, you got to pay that difference. Okay, so in most public projects, you're typically looking at about on average 10% overrun of what your bid price is because of these changes. The contractor is going to turn it over to you when they're done, and you're going to accept it for operations and maintenance, Public owner bears that responsibility. And for larger things on maintenance, we call it periodic maintenance. This would be like painting the bridge as an example. You're going to bid that out and hire a private contractor to do that. So this is your traditional approach. Next slide, Kevin. So on the left are the pros and on the right are the cons of this approach. Okay, as we talked about, a pro is you're in full control. You pick out everything. Okay, it's your design. It typically gets maximum competition because the industry is used to it and everybody is going to be interested and want to bid on it. It has the capacity to deliver the project. You typically are going to accept lowest bid, so you're going to ensure that you get solid price competition. And it's simple and most common approach for both the public sector and the road bridge industry, so everybody's used to it. As far as the cons on the right, typically takes longer to design, bid, and build it because you're doing it in consecutive manner. You're designing it, you're doing a bid process, you're accepting your bids, then you're going to do construction, then you're going to turn it over. As I mentioned, any changes in the field, the public owner is responsible for those. So it's going to increase your price over what your low bid is. Typically, low bid does not consider the quality of the contractor selected. The way contractors are identified, and those of you at the county and the city level are usually pretty familiar with this, but on road and bridge projects, the DOTs in Washington and Oregon will pre-qualify those contractors for both quality and also their capacity to bid the project as far as a performance bond. So you can use those lists, but when you bid it, you're not considering the quality of that team at that point. You're just basically looking at price. Once it's built, they warrant it for maybe a year, as much as 3 at most. So after that, you're on your own. It's your risk for cost of operations and maintenance. Next slide, Kevin. Now we're going to talk about what's called design build approach. So the difference are what's in blue. So you're going to do a partial design. So, say you take the house example again. You say, I want 3,000 square feet on average. I want 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. So you give them the basics, okay? And then they're going to finish the design for you and they're going to give you a price. But when you select them, you're going to look at the quality of that team as far as who they're bringing for that, the engineering firm and also the contractor firm. And you're going to evaluate them on a combination of quality and price. And why is that important? Well, that's important because when you're doing a partial design, you're going to ask them, hey, on this particular issue, I want to be very specific. You're going to prescribe what you want them to do. Could be a color, it could be architect, or we call it aesthetics, those types of things. You may have a certain thing you want on the side of the bridge, for example, that's artwork or those types of things. You may be very specific on that, but on the other issues like piers and things like that, you may say, that's okay. You do that. You're the expert. Okay, you complete the design. You're going to review their design and sign off on it, but instead of you doing it 100% yourself, you're going to do that typically at stages like 60% of completion, 90% of completion, 100%. A key difference here is when the contractor finishes the design, he's responsible for that design. So that means he's going to fund normal changes in the field. All of a sudden, if that shaft was assumed to be 80 and it's 90 now, he's got to pay for that. Okay, so those are the types of things that you shift. That's risk shifting from the public sector to the design build team. The only thing you would pay for typically on changes in work is if you requested it. Say on one end you had a typical intersection where it comes in to a red light and you turn left or right. and all of a sudden you wanted a roundabout after he was already under construction, then you would have to pay for that change, as an example. Again, he's going to turn it over for operations and maintenance, and you would assume those particular elements, same as traditional. Kevin, next slide. So the pros and cons, a major pro in this is you are doing a combination of quality and price in your selection. And you're also transferring the risk and responsibility for design and construction, which tends to limit price changes. It's generally a faster delivery method because you're combining design and construction together. So they can maximize flexibility on when timing for things, and they may be even able to start some construction early while they're finishing up design. It's a little less common because you're typically talking about medium to larger design and contractor firms, which on a bridge's size, you're normally going to be dealing with firms that size anyway. There's normally a higher level of competition because design build is becoming a more common delivery approach. As far as the cons, you do have less owner control. So you're transferring control over to the private sector through the design build team. And under the second bullet, you have to be comfortable with that. So you have to be comfortable giving them the ability to innovate and being willing to transfer some of that risk. And when I talk about performance specs, an example could be, again, back to I want 3 bedrooms and I want 2 baths, but I'm not going to tell you exactly where the walls have got to be and those types of things. That would be a performance spec. So as an example, on a bridge, it could be the environmental tells you where the endpoints are, tells you generally where it's got to be located within a range across the river. And it also tells you what type of bridge. It's going to be concrete, for example. You could give them that specs and they could go finish the design with a little bit more input on the engineering side. Again, it's typically warranted for a short period, 1 to 3 years, same as traditional. So next slide. I pulled an example. This is actually a WashDOT project that's close to Tacoma. It is, the reason I picked it is a similar size to your bridge project. It's around in the 300 million range. And that's why you would be talking about design build. They're typically larger projects. And the next slide, Kevin, this shows you the schedule for procurement. So it kind of gives you an idea of how long this takes. This is currently in procurement now. And you can see at the top, they have what's called the request for qualifications. That started in October of last year. And you can see that they did what's called shortlist in that section, step 1 around, they're going to do that in February of this year. So that's kind of the time period they did to go through saying who's interested, send me your qualifications, which would be resumes, firm names, firm descriptions, those types of things, in a general approach. And then what you're going to do, say 8 of those show up, you're probably going to take those and narrow them down to 3, maybe 4 at most. The step 2 would be the proposal phase. And once they narrow that down to those 3 or 4, then you would issue what's called a request for proposal to those 3 or 4. And that would have your performance specs, details that you wanted to do, your schedule for procurement, all those types of details would go into that particular request for proposal. They have something that's about the 4th line down called Alternative Technical Concepts, ATCs. What that means is if you have a performance spec or a particular item in your RFP, they can propose a change to you and you can review that and decide to accept it or not. So that's why it's called an alternative technical concept. You can see the proposal is due in August. And they announced the best proposer in September. So it's a little short of a year process to go through fairly sophisticated, large-scale design build procurement. And while they have notice to proceed 1 and 2, is 1 is to do the design, and 2 would be to move into construction, typically. So Kevin, I can stop there and see if there's any questions so far, or we can keep going.
Anybody have any thoughts or questions for Lowell?
Just, Lowell, in my experience, the idea that you can just give it to a contractor and then you don't have any trouble anymore with change orders, or that never does work out. Is that true?
It depends on your documents. You know, it really comes down to how much you tie things in. But yes, you are going to have changes. And honestly, what I find generally is the most complicated is what's called the scope of your project has to be well defined in your RFP. And typically the issues I run into is when you get out there and people start proposing changes, and then that gets into complicated processes. So, and it really does get down to how tight you are on your request for proposal and your contract documents. Road and bridge contractors are pretty used to, on these large projects, being pretty firm on these prices and assuming most of the risk.
If I could jump in, Lowell, I've been involved on multiple sides of a design build project or projects, even running or helping with the program management for ODOT. The key is going to be making sure that when you send out these documents, that the contractors have a good idea as to what you're wanting.
Yep.
Because the less definition you give at the front end, the more they're going to bid risk into that. Also, the less definition you give at the front end or less information, there could be some discoveries, such as the needing to drill deeper under the river than what they thought they were going to have to. And that's you know, that you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference. So the risk and the project information is very critical with these type of projects.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it comes down to your documents, and you have to be very clear about who assumes certain risk in those particular areas, because I've seen bridges, we do a lot of bridges in the projects I work on, and there have been areas where they have said, look, it is 100% your responsibility to get out there and drill more areas if you want to. And that is your risk and responsibility. There's been others where they've shared it and they said, okay, we'll work with you on it. And they come up with a share risk pool. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but it does take thought and consideration.
But in general, if you ask somebody to accept risk, they're going to want to make a profit on it.
Well, they're going to want to make a profit either way. So, I mean, we're dealing with the private sector, so they're not going to want to lose money. There's no question about it. But you have to think about, you know, road and bridge contractors, particularly bridge contractors, build bridges every single day. That is their bread and butter. So that's why you're hiring them, is for that expertise. So that's why you want to essentially ask them to assume risk that they're used to assuming and they're responsible for. Does that make sense?
That's key concept, yeah. If they are,
Okay.
You ask them to take the risk that they're familiar with.
That's right. And that's why typically in these types of setups, you would have meetings with the contractors as part of developing your RFQ and RFPs so that you can get their input because you want to understand from their perspective. And I'll give you a great example. Your strata out there is very different than strata, say, in Southeast Florida. Okay, strata in Southeast Florida is Swiss cheese rock. So it has voids. So contractors want to share some of that risk, whereas in other areas of the country, it's very solid. And the contractor says, no, I'm very comfortable assuming that risk. I work in this area all the time and I know it well. And they would say, sure, I can do that. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So those are the types of things you would have those conversations during the development of these documents.
Hey,
Lowell?
Lowell,
Yes.
did you want to cover typically with design build projects, because a design build team will spend a lot of overhead money making their proposal. And there are times where the agency will compensate them because they're spending a lot of time on making their proposal. You want to talk a little bit about that?
The concept Chuck's talking about, what's called stipends. And what contractors design build is not as common as P3 projects, because think of it this way: the more you ask them to do, the more they're going to have to spend in developing their proposal. So in a straight up bid, you're giving them 100% plans, so their bid cost is pretty low. When you go to design build, you're giving them partial plans, so they have to do a little bit more exploration through design to come up with a firm price for you. So, and you want them to do that so that they're comfortable. And what Chuck's talking about is they're willing to absorb some of that cost, but they may ask you, and I've seen stipends in design build projects anywhere from 100 grand to 500,000 on a project of this size. So, and what that means is if they lose, if they don't win the bid, you would be obligated to pay them that, but in return, they're going to give you own their work. So if they did design work and, they put together some set of plans and whatever, you would get that and you can then use it in finishing out the project. So other question I heard?
Yeah, this is Kate McBride. So this design build example that you have up here, is this for the traditional or more for the non-traditional? Or you're saying this is for either?
This is a combination. This is moving from traditional to more innovative because you're risk sharing. Design build for a lot of governments has become a common used approach, but it's not. Say you have 100 projects to do, design build may be 5 to 10 of those versus 90 to 95 are traditional. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a less common used approach, but it's becoming more common, particularly on select types of projects. On this particular project, it has both road and bridge work in it. There's a number of bridges in it. It's got interchanges, so it's a fairly complex project. And the contractors are comfortable doing that because that's what they do now. It's a common way to deliver projects.
And I think the 10% overage is, a common, with the city, we just see that's just common. You get a contractor bidding on something, that's just what it's going to be.
Well, in design build, you would typically see that overage be more in the 1 to 3% range.
Oh, much lower.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're lowering that amount. You're getting because you're shifting some of that risk. They're taking over the design and finishing it out. So that design becomes their risk, not your risk.
And
that's where they earn their stipend.
No, the stipend is really for if they don't win the bid. Okay, say you shortlist 3 firms, you're only going to pick one. Okay, so the other 2 would say, hey, maybe I want 100 grand stipend to offset some of my design cost. And I will give you my plans, and they're going to have good things in their plans that you can then use. They may have artwork, they may have innovative approaches, those types of things that you can then work with the contractor team selected to finish out the project.
And to get to this point where you would be in this step 1 on this slide that you're showing right here, we would have to have be further down the road than we are right now
Well,
with
let me,
design.
if you don't mind, I'll cover that a little bit later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Kevin, let's go into the P3 approach.
Great. There you go.
Okay. This is what's called firm bid P3 approach. Okay. So you can see everything's blue, which means everything's different than a traditional. And what you're talking about is just like the first part is just like a design build. You're going to do partial design and you're going to essentially select a firm on a combination of quality and pricing. The difference is they're also going to be responsible for operations and maintenance over a longer term, okay, such as 30 years or 40 years as an example. You're going to shift even more risk because now they're not only responsible for design and construction, but they're also responsible for operations and maintenance. So what they're going to do when they do their design, they're going to be looking at not only the construction that they need to do, but they're going to be looking at long-term operations. For example, I've seen firms put in more robust construction during a P3 because it reduces their operations cost longer term. So, and it could be they use more robust construction materials or those types of things, or they put in, more robust lighting systems or so forth, because they want to reduce that long-term operations cost and therefore reduce their risk. You do have the ability to review their design at those stages like 60, 90%, 100%. You also are going to approve them moving from design to construction. You would approve them moving from construction to operations and maintenance. They would assume that risk of all those areas of design. They also would finance it for you. So if you had money that was in the future, they would advance that for you through doing a financing through a bank loan or a bond, or even their own equity that they would bring into it, their investor equity. And then you would approve the handback. And what that means is at the end of that 30-year term, they're going to hand it back to you, and you have specifications for that, as well as for operations and maintenance that you're going to outline as part of your procurement document. So next slide. The pros and cons.
Lowell, I
Yes,
have
ma'am.
one question on that last slide.
Yes, ma'am.
So you said 30 years, the handback,
As an example.
as an example. So is the handback at the time that it's paid off? Is that typical?
It's not necessarily paid off. It's
Okay.
you're doing a contract with them. So essentially think about your contract being a 35-year contract, 5 years to build it and 30 years to operate it. So 35 years. At the end of that 30 years, their contract ends. Okay, and they're going to hand that asset back to you for operations and maintenance. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and as part of that, you're going to have them accumulate what's called a reserve, because you're going to inspect it and you're going to say, oh, well, this area needs painting, this area needs that, and that reserve would fund that, so that when they give it back to you, it would be in good working condition. Because bridges typically these days are lasting, if they're well built for a big bridge like this, 70 to 100 years. So that would not be the full life of it as an example. So next slide, Kevin. So the pros and cons of this approach is you are selecting a firm based off quality, price, and financing. The team is assuming design, finance, construction, operations, and maintenance, which tends to give you more of a fixed price over time for the project. It can advance projects because they're financing for you, as well as they're merging multiple of these phases together. It's typically a faster quality delivery approach because a lot of these things are being done concurrent. And operations and maintenance are considered during design and construction, which typically gives you a better overall life cycle cost. It does give you a long-term warranty. And what I mean by that is they're on the hook for it for that 35-year term as an example. It's their responsibility. And you would have standards built into your contract with them that would hold them responsible for that warranty during that time period. Now, the cons are clearly you can see there is less public control. You do approve at certain stages of the project, but you're not into managing it day to day like you are for the current bridge, as an example. You have to be very comfortable developing performance specs and allowing the public owner to monitor and apply penalties, which is different than most governments do for these long-term projects. You have to be comfortable with innovation and risk transfer and life cycle cost and value for money. Value for money is essentially saying over the life of this, based off what they've done or proposed to you, does it look less costly than if you did it yourself? Does that make sense? So, and otherwise, if not, why would you do it that way? So, and you do have to develop performance specifications that are successful, which is an art. It's not a science, it's an art. Worked on a number of projects with that, and trust me, it is an art. It takes time and energy. These are typically larger projects, which limits the number of firms and investors that can compete. So typically on a project of your size, you may have, 3-4 firms interested, as an example. Instead of a design build, you're probably going to have 6 or 7 that would be interested potentially. So, in a low bid, you're going to have even potentially more than that. So next slide. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. This is from Colorado DOT. And it's essentially their decision-making tool for deciding whether to do a P3 or not. And they have a lot of projects. So they go through this on all what are called their major projects, which are their bigger, I would say 100 million or larger type projects. And they consider whether it might be a P3 or not up in the upper left-hand side in the blue diamond. If it's not, it just goes a regular process. If it becomes a P3 consideration, they go through an analysis process to essentially determine if it is the best value. Okay, and you can see that value for money analysis in the gray box in the upper part that goes over to the diamond with the P3 best value. After they go through that preliminary analysis, then they go into the actual procurement stage. And you can see all the different elements they're considering that go into this. So it's not a simple process. Okay, you have a procurement manager, a project manager, you have a technical advisor, you have a legal advisor, you have a financial advisor that goes into this because it's going to have legal contracts. It's going to have that are different. It's going to have financing in it. So you need to consider that. It's going to have design build in it. So you need to consider that. So there's elements that you on your end have to look at to ensure that it is done well. And then you get in the implementation stage, and these are essentially the elements that it goes through. And I can spend as much time on this as you want if you want to just take a look at it and see if you have any questions.
Lowell, at what point that project identification, high-level screening, at what point in the design is that possible P3 project decision point
It's
made?
not necessarily design, it's more towards the end of the environmental. And late in the environmental process or shortly after they get their environmental approvals is typically when they look at that in Colorado. So But it really comes down to a couple of things that I'll go through later. For example, you need a funding plan as one example. Before you really can go into that evaluation stage, it's kind of hard to do that if you don't feel like you can fund it adequately, as an example. So why don't we go to the last section, and then I'll go through some of these other considerations. This is a P3 approach, but it's a different approach. And this is becoming more common these days in the P3 development side. And essentially the difference is the public owner says, I'm not 100% sure I want to do a P3, but I think I do. So I'm going to select a team based off of quality only. It's not going to be selected on price. And we and that P3 developer are going to collectively work together for a period of time, which is typically called an interim agreement. And we're going to look at, can we come to a conceptual design and a price that we can agree on, an approach we can agree on. And if you do, you go to a final agreement and you move forward. If you can't, it has an off ramp. Okay. And at that point, you could go design build as an example on the off ramp. The private sector is not going to do that for anything. They're not going to do it for free. So if you do the off ramp, then you're going to have to pay them for at least part of that, for their time and energy during that time period. But you're not committing to a 35-year agreement at that point. You're typically committing to a 12 to 18-month agreement. So you're not locked in for that long time period. So otherwise, it's very similar to a P3 approach. It's mostly that front end piece that's different. So Kevin, if you'll go to the next slide. As far as pros and cons, the blue is really what's different. And I mentioned that it allows that off ramp if negotiations are not successful. On the con side, there is less competition because it's typically a negotiated price. But normally what's going to happen is this private developer is going to come in and they're going to price out a builder typically to come in and finish the construction. So you're going to see price competition. It's just not going to be the same as if you did a firm bid approach. Not going to be quite as robust as that. So next slide, Kevin. This is a project in Maryland that I'm currently working on. And the purple side is the project we're working on right now, which is phase 1. This is in the Washington, D.C. area up to Baltimore. Next slide. This is their progressive P3 approach, and the black at the bottom is really the reason Maryland DOT considered this. Okay. They wanted to engage the phase developer in a collaborative process with their local stakeholders, which would be you, as an example, to identify the solutions, avoid and minimize and mitigate potential impacts. And an example in that area is they have a lot of land impacts, and some of them are going to involve potentially taking homes as an example. So they're looking at ways to mitigate that. They're also looking to improve cost certainty as part of enhancing the cost and the schedule. As I mentioned, there will be some price competition, but there also would be some negotiation as part of that. And it also ensures that all sections within the phase are delivered efficiently, and they do have an off ramp. So at the end of that interim agreement, if they can't come to agreement, they've gone through 18 months instead of, a 35-year commitment. So next slide. This gives you an idea of the schedule for this project in Maryland. They started in February of last year. with the request for qualification. In July, they essentially identified the 4 teams, and they started the RFP process, request for proposal, which again was not a price proposal, but a quality proposal, which was received in December, and we're currently evaluating those. And in February, they will announce the selected team, which at that point will be primarily based on quality. There are some price factors in there, but they're things like rate of return on their investment, as an example. You know, those types of things. So you can do a little bit of price competition at that point, but not fully on your design and construction price. And then they go through, you know, what they call the pre-development work, which is doing the conceptual design to the point they can actually price it. And you can see fall of 2022 is when they're actually going to be at a firm committed deal where it would be like a 35-year contract. So they have that time period to work together and see if they can come to an approach or not. So the other thing that time period would give you is the ability to finalize your funding plan if you chose to do this approach. So that would be one potential advantage. So next slide. And this really gets to the question that was asked earlier about what are some of the things that really kind of need to get done to effectively make a project delivery decision. And, you know, a key one is, when is your environmental approval going to be received? You don't have to have it exactly done. Maryland started towards the end of that process with their procurement for the progressive P3 approach, but that's taken some risk. And a lot of people don't want to do that risk. They want to go ahead and get their environmental approval done. You really need to understand what the design and construction industry is willing to do. Do they prefer a design build? Do they prefer, you know, traditional? Do they prefer P3? You know, what do they think? And if you have a preference, you can discuss that with them and get their input. And typically that's done in 2 forms, either a request for information, or you send out basic information and ask them to respond to you with their ideas, or you have what's called an industry forum where they meet with you. And a lot of cases you'll meet with some the key contractors one-on-one, and they can be very open with you about what they're thinking. The next item is really the public owner. You know, the timing of that particular decision and how much control does that public owner want, which gets back to that control versus shifting control and risk. And who's going to be the decision maker is a key point about making a decision about the project delivery approach. And a thing to think about there is, a lot of times your funding grant side can have some input on that. So if, you know, Washington or Oregon or federal grants or whatever come into play, you know, they may have some input on that, and they typically do. So
What kind of input will would those entities exert?
well, I can tell you the federal side is not going to tell you how to do your procurement. What they're going to do is say, hey, I want to ensure that you have a good, robust procurement process. They're not going to say it's got to be traditional or design build, or they're just going to say, if you take federal grants, you got to follow the requirements of federal law, but it could be project delivery approach, any of those. Now, when it comes to Oregon or Washington, that's really going to come down to what kind of strings they attach to it. And, you know, in most cases, I'm sure they would ask the DOTs to provide input on that as part of doing that. And of course, you know, experts that deal with your legislative bodies know that better than I do. So your funding plan is going to be absolutely essential. Anybody that's going to bid on this project is going to want to know you got money to back paying them. So it comes down to your toll revenues and what that can generate. And I know there's stress and pressures on that. People are very cognizant of tolls and, can they be raised? Should they be lowered? Those kind of questions have to be thought through. And if there's a gap, then how's that going to be funded?
Or for example, we anticipate that we need a substantial TIFIA loan. And how do you never have assurance you're going to get it?
Well, TIFIA is not funding. TIFIA is financing. You have to have money to pay that back. What I would look at, and I know you guys have already got a grant from this, but the Infra Grant Program requires a certain amount of that percentage-wise each year to be into rural areas. You've already got a grant from it, so I suspect they're going to be willing to assist you in the future with that. And there's been some pretty substantial grants in that program. So
Substantial, like how much?
Well, I mean, there's been projects 50 to 100 million granted. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's a pretty substantial program. The bill grant program is typically limited to 20 million per year. So it's not big numbers, but every little bit adds to the pot. And the thing I find with funding plans is, everybody's interested, but they don't necessarily want to be the first one to jump in. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
kind of like, oh, well, if you get a federal grant, then okay, I'll put some in. You know what I mean? So it becomes the chicken and the egg a little bit. So you have a timing issue there about the decisions. But I can tell you the Infra Grant Program will be very interested in helping you once you get your record of decision on your environmental approved. Because that's really what they look for to help you move to the next stage. But they're going to, when you apply for that, they're going to say, hey, do you have a full funding plan if we give you the money? So it becomes that chicken and egg of, are the states willing to put any in? What can toll revenues fund? And I know Kevin and Michael and their team have been working with Steve on that, to come up with options. So that's definitely a key issue.
Well, can I just have a quick question on the project funding plan. How advanced or far along does the cost estimate have to be? I mean, at this point, we're going to have less than 5% engineering or design after NEPA. Can you talk a little bit about the nexus between having an adequate, quote unquote, cost estimate and project funding?
You're building a bridge. So there are teams that can give you pretty good estimates on that. And what I mean by that is the bridge itself. It's the additives that add cost. And that gets into artwork and connections on each end and those types of things, if you want special lighting or particular elements added onto the bridge. So that's really what gets into what I call the extras of above the basic bridge cost. And a lot of that can be put into options. But for infra, I think when you get your environmental document done, that's probably adequate to ask them at that level with an estimate at that level. So their main question for you is not how firm is the price, it's more how are other people willing to pitch in and help match your infra grant.
If the states would start that ball rolling, would that carry a lot of weight at infra?
Absolutely. But I mean, it kind of goes both ways. The state will probably be a lot more interested if the feds say, hey, we're willing to put money in.
Mhm.
You know, which they've done. You know, they put in the 5 million, which is a good start.
And Oregon put in 5 as well.
Right, that's exactly right. So,
Lowell, you're saying the TIFIA though is, you know, it's financing. It's money you have to pay back with
that's correct.
with
It's a loan.
well, tolls, or I would assume tolls. You've got your
Well,
tolls.
it could be tolls, it could be, you know, you may have, you know, a state or someone that says, hey, I can't give you all the money today, but I can give you 10 million a year for, you know, 6 years or whatever, or 7 years. But I can't give you, you know, all that now. And you could get a TIFIA loan and advance that money up.
So it might be if you had a way to repay, that you weren't going to be able to add more onto the toll, if that was how we chose to go or could go, that TIFIA might be good for that.
Yes, ma'am. And TIFIA it's a great option for financing. It's cheap money. And what I mean by that is the interest rates are about as low as you can get.
Yeah.
And the two things to consider on TIFIA is it's typically limited to 33%. They might get you to 50 because you're a rural project, but those definitions have gotten a little crazy in the last change of the federal bills. It used to be very flexible, but they've limited the project sizes a bit on what I call the rural program to 100 million. So your project's bigger than that, but those are all going through federal review because the Transportation Act is going to be redone in the next year to year and a half. So some of those things are going to change, and that's something that you might want to advocate for. Because and the other thing is you have to pay it back with non-federal money. So you couldn't use an infra grant to pay back TIFIA, for example. But you could use a state grant or toll revenues. So, Kevin, next slide.
This is Bob Ben. I have a
Pardon?
question.
Sure, absolutely.
I have a question about the funding, I guess, based on it. If you go with a P3 approach, is there anything that discourages or incentivizes governmental entities to loan or grant money based on the type of approach you take from traditional design build and P3? Or is it not going to influence on that with respect to what you've seen happen?
At the federal level, no. As a matter of fact, they've actually encouraged public-private partnerships as well as design build. So federal grants are not going to have any consideration. They're just going to say, are you following a solid procurement process that meets federal law? The state level is really going to be up to if they put any strings attached to the money. And that's really going to come down to, you know, what gets through the legislative process. So, and that's, you know, one of those $64,000 questions, but.
I guess I'm just trying to understand, regardless of the approach we take, it's not going to impact, it won't have a high likelihood of impacting our ability to receive government funding.
No, it would not impact the ability to receive it. No, not at all. As a follow-up, Kevin has put together a date of February 5th for a panel discussion. And this would be two what are called public owner experts that have actually done P3 projects. One is out of Colorado DOT, very good gentleman that I know well, I've done work with, and he can give you kind of his thinking process of what he goes through to decide whether they do traditional or design build or, you know, innovative P3. And they also do a lot of innovative financing too, that he can give you experience with. we're working to get a person out of Washington too. And Kevin, I did talk to her today. She's checking her schedule, so she
Oh, that's
wants to
great.
do it if her schedule permits.
She's out of King County.
She was with USDOT before in their innovative delivery program, so she knows the DOT side at USDOT very well. She's also advised local governments for Ernst & Young and their P3 advisory, and she now works for King County up in Seattle. So, and then 2 developers, and what I mean by that is these are actually companies that are investors and developers that do P3 projects. United Bridge Partners you've heard about. They delivered an unsolicited proposal to you several years ago. They have done bridges around the country as P3s and typically do bridge projects in the size of yours. So that's a very good comfort level for them. They're not the guys that do the billion-dollar projects. They typically do projects in this size range. Plenary Group is based in Canada, and they do a lot of big and small projects. They've done projects on the West Coast, like the Long Beach Courthouse as an example, and they also are doing projects. They did a toll road in Denver, US 36, as an example, and they've done both what I call firm bid and progressive. Both of those have. So they've done both types of approaches, so they can give you their view on it, if that makes sense. So we would get a public owner perspective as well as a private developer perspective. And you'll find they'll be pretty honest with you. And what I mean by that is, they'll give you the unabridged version because, developers are only going to come in if they feel like it's worth their time and energy. And they'll be pretty open and honest with you about, hey, we're interested, but, we want to ensure that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it well for you. And you really do want to do a P3. So, and what I mean by that is everybody's in agreement on the approach from that perspective. So not that you have made a decision about that at all, and they understand that. We've been very clear with them that this is in the early stages of discussion, and it's got a lot more work to get done before the local area is ready to make a decision.
So all the people that would come on that panel are all P3 industry people, or?
Well, there's 2 that are government that have actually been in your shoes and done P3s. They're government employees, and the other 2 are private developers. So you'll get both perspectives.
Okay. So take United Bridge Partners. If at the end of the day we said we wanted to go with a design build approach, would they be our design build partner as well as a P3 partner?
No. No, they're a P3
why?
delivery.
Why not? Why would they care?
Well, they're not a builder. They're an investor.
Okay.
So they hire builders as part of their team. So they don't actually have bridge builders as part of their team, and Plenary Group doesn't either. They're kind of agnostic to the contractor. They're going to hire the best contractor just like you would if you hired them. So
what they're bringing is financing ability and design ability, both?
Yes, they can bring design, they can bring financing, they also assume risk. That's what they do. They're used to doing that. And they're used to managing that risk. And that kind of gets into, you talk about, well, hey, I've done projects and we've had, for smaller firms, it's hard to assume risk. And the reason being is because they have bonding companies that back them. And their bonding companies will only allow them to assume a certain amount of risk. And that's why their warranty periods are so short. These folks do what they call wrap that risk through a lot of financing and other mechanisms, such as parent company guarantees and those types of things from large type companies that back them, that assume that risk. So that's how they get comfortable with assuming price certainty and assuming risk over long periods. They know how to manage that.
Lowell, is what the, like United Bridge Partners, that kind of group, they're kind of like a general contractor that does a semi-custom home. That's how I'm looking at it anyway. They take the risk, they figure out how to do it, they hire the subcontractors to get it done. And then, but you have a lot of input at the beginning on how you want it to be done.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
is that, and then they have all these subcontractors underneath. So that's kind of what they do. Is
That's
that right? Okay.
That's right.
All right.
And think of it this way: is they're kind of like, you know, you might hire a general contractor and they're going to manage everything for you. It's just different. They're managing financing as well as risk, as well as managing the actual contractors that are doing the work. So they're managing all of that, and that's their specialty. That's what they do. So, and you know, the issue kind of comes down to of, you know, do you want to turn over the bridge for the next 30, 40 years and say, hey, we're turning the keys over to you. We're going to monitor you. We're going to make sure it gets done right. And we're going to make sure you continue to do that over the time period, but we're not going to have to worry about it beyond that. So
We've got about 5 more minutes on this item. Just in advance of the presentation, we were thinking that maybe doing some case studies and kind of walking through various case studies with these 4 entities might be one approach. Does the working group have any elements that they would like to see specifically addressed in this presentation or in this discussion that we can prep the panelists for? Is there anything, what are you hoping to get out of this panel?
I have a question for the panel. How is the money part figured out? How do we figure out how much money we're going to get on tolls, when they're going to go up, when those tolls will go up? How is that figured into the financing plan? And when do they need to know, you know, whether they can go forward with what we have? Timing and financing.
Great, thank you. Any other?
Well, I want to know if we're going to have, I mean, to me, at the end of the day, what it costs to cross the river is the most critical piece of the whole puzzle. And so I guess I'd like to know what their cost of financing is. And Lowell, you might know that. What's like a P3 partner or
well, they're going to
the
drive
equity
that
to the
cost.
project?
Yeah, they're going to drive that cost down as low as they can, but you know, their money typically has what's called 3 layers. They're going to do a TIFIA loan normally, which would be the cheapest.
Actually, they would apply for that loan on their own.
Well, yeah. And then you have bank loans, or typically they'll do bank loans during construction period, which is typically cheaper money. And then they'll do a long-term bond to take that out, or a TIFIA loan to take that out at the end of construction when the risk is lower. And then they're going to have some equity investment. And that equity investment's not too cheap, but it's not typically the largest part of the puzzle.
And do they insist on equity?
Well, to get the financing plan done, there's going to have to be a certain amount of equity. And it varies typically from 5% to as much as 20%.
Of the project total?
Yes. So it just depends on how risky the funding side is. Like if they're dependent upon future tolls, they're gonna have a little bit more equity.
So potentially this TIFIA money that we're working on to get the limit raised, you know, I mean, I think it's great that we're having the P3 group next time, because they may say, well, it's what it is, and we'll work on that, or we'll get what we can get, and we already have that figured in. So I'd like, you know, that's a question, but it has to do with the financing again. How they work with TIFIA. Yeah.
Well, they've all worked with TIFIA, so they're used to it. And the key though is if you can get the minimum amount for the rural raised, what it does, say for example, the interest rate today is probably 1.3% for a 30-year loan, if you can believe it. What that does, if you can get the rural raised, it cuts it in half for the rural project. So instead of 1.2, it'd be 0.6%. That's pretty cheap money.
Bob, Benton, how are you doing on time? We got about 10 minutes before we hit 2:30. Are you doing good?
Yeah, I'm good until 3.
Okay, great.
Would be any experience of these the P3 developers working with you know, this many different jurisdictions with their projects.
Bob, I'm really struggling to hear you. Is it possible to get, I don't know if the microphone?
I don't know. It's just going through my.
Perfect.
That's great.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. I'm interested in if any of the P3 developers have dealt with this many jurisdictions, or how they saw them come together before they actually did a project. If they've seen any of that, because at this point we've got a kind of a concept of what we think we may have, but you know, that hasn't been finalized as far as who we actually are.
Well, I can answer that. They have, but they also are going to need to know who's going to sign the contract. So, so they will want to know that for sure. Because at the end of the day, somebody's got to be the governmental entity to sign that as the owner.
At what point is that generally established, I guess, would be my next question. Lowell, when you've dealt with this, I mean, have people got this far down the road without having that entity be established?
They have. And I've seen them go all the way where they started procurement and they finished it during the procurement. I mean, everybody knew what was going to happen, but it just had to go through, say, governmental approval processes and those types of things. I think yours is a little earlier than that, but you know, these things don't get procured overnight. So, you know, they take 12 to as much as 14, 16 months. So
when they're turned back over, like how many of these projects have actually came to the point? I mean, how P3, I don't know how long it's been around. How many of them have made it through the entire process and then been turned back over?
There's none in the United States yet. There are some in Canada that are that far along, and there's a lot of them around the world that are that far along.
I guess I'm just thinking of what happens when, you know, contractually, when you get to that point of when it's turned back over, we're not really going to know what we didn't have in the contract that maybe we should have, unless we've seen some other people make those mistakes first.
Well, you know, that's part of putting a good process together, and essentially ensuring that you've got a good technical advisor and legal and financial advisor that have done these. So they'll walk you through it. And, you know, those kind of things are well defined both internationally and nationally now, as to what goes into the specifications, as well as, and particularly for bridge projects, because you know, with Federal Highway Administration, they have very, very good standards related to bridges as far as how you inspect them and what's expected and what kind of cycles are involved for the different elements.
Lowell, could we look to you for recommendations regarding who those people would be?
Sure.
I have a question. I think you had asked about, in preparation for that next meeting, maybe some case studies or specific examples. With United Bridge Partners, I'm wondering if we could get either a briefing ahead of time, written form, or just have them speak more directly to that South Norfolk Bridge project, because there's elements to that that I do think are similar to what we're considering. And specifically what I would like is for them to break down in a detailed form the toll increases that have been happening on that bridge since it went into the P3 with United Bridge Partners, because I think that's something we're very mindful of. And I could be wrong about this, but I feel like that starting toll there before it was handed over and was the old bridge was around $1. And now it's up to, I think, close to $6 or something in that range. But I would just be curious, and I think it's an applicable real world example for us to imagine what a P3 created bridge could look like in terms of what those toll increases are that come down the pipe and the justification for them as the length of the
Right. Well,
project.
keep in mind, you control that. Okay, they don't. And what I mean by that is what you put in the contract controls that. So if you don't want the toll raised, you can put that in the agreement. If you want it to be raised by consumer price index, for example, or if you want to have it limited to certain prior approvals. For example, and you can ask Nick Farber with Colorado DOT when he talks, because they have toll facilities, and you can ask him how they manage that, because it has to go to his board for any toll approvals. So there's a lot of ways you can build that into the agreement so that you do manage control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that's really helpful. And I guess in the way my head works, it's nice to like have a project directly to compare against or reference maybe the decisions that were made and specifically on tolls, understanding.
There was some early, and there was some, what I call some early mistakes made on some early projects that didn't have what I call good parameters for that. And they became, very acrimonious. Example would be the Indiana Toll Road the tolls raised pretty high on that. And that was one of the early P3s where a firm came in and essentially bought the road and agreed to do improvements to it. And, it all comes down to the funding plan. And a bridge like this, once you've got the funding plan done, you're likely going to build in a toll rate schedule that delivers that. And the question would be, why would you change that at that point? Does that make sense? If you got the project funded, why would you change that?
Yeah.
So, the only reason I could see is if traffic goes down, for example, you might give them a little latitude, or, there may be some things like that you have to look at. But beyond that, I mean, you're pretty stable. You've had that bridge there, what the tolls have been. So you've got a pretty good base case to start with.
That's a great idea, Marla. I'll write that down, make sure we can incorporate that in as many of the presentations as possible.
Yeah, because there is real good information about how to manage that now, and it's varied all over the country as to whether the governmental agency wanted to keep control or they included in the contract controls on the toll rates. Because trust me, everybody has the same thought you do. They want to watch that one very closely.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it was Robert that asked, who signs that contract?
Who signs the contract?
You're on mute, Betty.
Maybe that was the question.
So Robert had asked who would sign that contract, and just for clarification, as I understand it, the only one that can sign a P3 contract would be the public entity, and that would be the Port Commission, correct?
Well, at this point, the Port Commission owns the bridge, but if you transfer it to a new entity, then it would be that entity. Typically would be the chair of whatever that board is, and the executive director.
But at this point, let's say the bridge fell in the water tomorrow. We needed to get a bridge going right away. The entity that has the control and can sign it tomorrow if we needed it is the port. I mean, that's
think
possible. That's possible.
Yeah, it
Yeah, I
would
think
be
that's true.
the
Since we
owner of the
do-
bridge.
And that's with the P3 rules that were established 2 or 3 years ago with Steve Siegel's help.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
And it took legislation at Oregon state level. And I think to get the authorization for the BiState, it's going to take legislation at the Washington state level.
In the non-binding MOU does allow the BiState working group to allow the port to consider that P3 as well moving forward.
That's where I was going with that. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. That was my understanding.
And for
Yeah.
example, if you needed to start, for example, the procurement process, you could do that in that approach, even if you had to change it at a later time, as long as you keep everybody informed.
Yeah, very transparent.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, I think we've got some good feedback from the working group. Thank you. If you have other thoughts about what you would like to see in this panel discussion, please email those to me, and then I'll be sure to forward those to Lowell. And as we develop our panel, we'll be sure to ask for them to at least address in some way or shape or form these questions and concerns.
Yeah, Kevin, I think it would be good to have them give some specific case examples on these specific issues.
I think that'd be
So-
great. Well, great. Well, Lowell, thank you. I think that's, I think we're pretty much it. We just have kind of the next steps. I think this group has seen versions of this. And then, so I think we are done with the presentation. Lowell, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Lowell, thank you. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, everyone have a great weekend.
Bye-bye, Lowell. I'll be in touch.
Okay.
Kevin, is our next meeting at 1 o'clock on February 5th?
That is, I've set aside 3 hours for
3
that
hours, okay.
panel discussion, so that should be 1 to 4.
Okay.
And so Chuck Green is here, and we're beginning the process of developing the RFP to get some engineering started, some of the preliminary work, including we're also looking at geotechnical borings as well. So I did ask Chuck to give the working group a brief update on where he's at in the development of the RFP process. Chuck, are you still there?
I'm still here, thank you. And I'm trying not to get into the weeds since I'm one of these engineering types who likes to get into the weeds.
Thanks, Chuck.
So as you saw during Lowell's presentation, we do not have a project delivery decision yet, how we're going to actually build this thing. And because of that, there's a variety of ways we go from where we are now, which is about a 5% design, to where we need to be for making that decision. What we also want to be careful is that we don't take the design so far that when we make a decision like going design, build, or P3, that we've done too much design. And so what we're trying to do is to figure out what's a good milestone to take this to, so that we can do a proof of concept, we get enough information available to make that project delivery decision, and also gives a prospective design, build, or contractor team enough information that they can minimize bidding their risk into their cost. What I was looking at the latest cost estimate from last year or a year and a half ago, and we've got $50 million in contingencies just because we just don't know enough about the bridge design or construction, there's also another $20 million built in for what's called escalation, which is the cost of inflation between now and when you actually build this. So there's some unknowns that we still have to face to get to that point. What we're looking at with the design or preliminary engineering approach or procurement is to take it to that proof of concept I mentioned, or a design acceptance package, which is a DOT term, that then if they say, yeah, we know enough about this that you know what the right-of-way needs are going to be, you know about how deep your footings are going to be in the river, you know where you're going to have to mitigate your environmental impacts and what the cost of that is, that you can move to that next step, whatever that project delivery method is. We also want to make sure that we build enough flexibility into our procurement that if we decide to go that traditional approach, that we don't need to keep procuring a new consultant every time we go to the next step. And so what we want to do is to look at procuring this consultant with the option of going all the way through final design, and then have a series of off ramps built in that if we decide to go design build, all right, turn over the design, take it out on the street. If we go P3, we can then make that available and look at contracting, seeking proposals and contracting for P3. Or if we decide to just take this all the way through traditionally, they can just keep going. So that's kind of where we are. The one thing that Lowell didn't talk about, which is kind of a little twist on that traditional design bid build approach, is something called Construction Management General Contractor, or CMGC. We're going to be talking with ODOT next week because they've done, they're about ready to launch one called the I-5 Rose Quarter Project, which has, they've made that decision. What a CMGC does is you take the project to a certain design, you bring in a contractor because they approach your design from a construction standpoint. They can tell you if there's conflicts, they can give you a pretty good idea of what the cost would be. And then from that point, you finish the design, but it's up to that general contractor then to bid out the different pieces of that project. So they turn into your almost your built-in procurement company. You typically do that around 60% design. So that's kind of where we are. We're still building up what we are asking this consultant to do. We're also looking at what are some of the milestones because, recognizing there might be TIFIA or infrastructure packages at the federal or state level where we need to lock in a good cost estimate to try to get that money. We need to build in that flexibility so we can be able to respond to that as the consultant goes through their process. So we hope to have this over the next few weeks developed to a point where we can get this procurement on the street and start looking at getting a consultant on board sometime later in the summer.
Chuck, who has that combination of skill sets?
Well, actually, you have one that's working for the NEPA EIS work now. That's WSP.
They call me about every other week, John. I've probably talked to 8 different firms that are interested in that AE design contract.
And that's the one advantage you have is there's a number of big firms around here that actually have brought in personnel because they're looking at an even bigger bridge downriver on the Columbia called I-5, and they've been gearing up for going after that design work. You've got HDR and AECOM. There really are literally 7 or 8 consultants in the region who could take this work on. The concern would be because if you go design build, whoever does this preliminary design to get you to that point they're going to want to be eligible to go after that big fish, which is your final design. That's your big dollars on the design side. And so we want to word this so that they have flexibility in themselves, so that we can have that one off ramp, so we don't preclude that one consultant from getting on a design build team and actually going after. We also want to make sure that we've created a conflict of interest so that they can't go after it because they might have some inside information. So that's what we're working through right now on that side.
The other item that that's exciting is that the build program, even though they don't have their grant agreement form issued yet, they are willing to sit down with the port. Chuck's going to participate in that along with WSP, who is the environmental contractor. And we're going to look at that geotechnical work. And so that's about a $700,000 effort. And that would actually be doing geotechnical borings at the locations of the pier locations. And so the House remaining funds from the House Bill 2017 project would actually leverage the build grant. And so that, I think that's a real first level effort, is to get those geotechnical borings, because there's so much risk in the geotechnical analysis.
The other
Kevin,
thing,
when's the
oh, sorry.
EIS going to be done? When will the final be? When will we have that?
WSP anticipates that the final EIS record of decision will be out in early August, sometime summertime.
Okay.
So
And then the other question I have, and this might be a question for Chuck, is when we start with the design, I got this kind of from Lowell. He's saying that the extra fancy things are the things that are going to cost the money. If you have a roundabout, or if you have a lot of artwork, or if you, paint it purple instead of black, or whatever it is, that a lot of those things can really add up the dollars quickly. I took that from him today. And so, we want it to look good for sure, but where will there be places that we can draw the line and say, that would be great to have, but do you want to pay $5 for a toll or $2 for a toll?
Mhm.
I'd like to correlate some of those things to costs of tolls. So people that are, pie in the sky, oh, I just want to have it like this. It's like, no, we can't have bike lanes on both sides. Well, maybe we can, I don't know, but I'd like those things itemized more, so it'll be easier to talk to the public about things we can get and can't get for the price we want to pay.
Excellent point. And
Excellent point.
what I was going to bring up is that there's, what was our 135 comments from the supplemental draft EIS. Some of those are like build the bridge yesterday. Some of them, like the bike path matter, could affect the design. And so we would like to know what comes out of that, so we can give this consultant some direction as to what they're designing and how much it's going to cost, which then we can work back into, well, how does that affect your revenue, your tolls? The other thing,
and if a bicycle is going to pay the same amount as a car to cross, well then fine.
yeah, well, that will. I'll leave that argument to the bicycle community, because they'll think they don't need to pay tolls because they're not polluting.
Yeah.
They're
still crossing. They're still crossing.
They're still crossing, and they're still with Bill. The other thing I want to note that Lowell didn't get to is that there's design elements of the bridge that we just haven't designed yet. The gorge is windy. And so we're going to need to know, no surprise, right? So we're going to need to know how thick some of those girders and beams are going to need to be to hold up to the wind. We don't know what the Columbia Gorge Commission is going to want as far as design look, which is some of that architectural and maybe art. But so there's a variety of unknowns that we still need to work through to get a pretty decent cost estimate, even beyond the art and the other considerations.
Glad we have you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you,
And
Chuck.
I do apologize for interrupting you earlier during Lowell's presentation.
It was a good discussion. I think, I hope that that was a beneficial presentation from Lowell. As you noted, the panel will be February 5th at 1 o'clock. That is a Friday. And, unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I think we're done. So Bob, we can get you out of here by 3. Anything else? All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Happy New Year. Thank you all.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.